Honestly, this shit's just kind of ridiculous. Yo, what up? Welcome back to the Apostate's Bible read-through. So, moving along, we are now in the middle of Genesis here. We're in chapters 27 through 30. And really what I want to focus on today are 2 points. So, the first is, I think, quite humorous, and then the second one is, I guess, something that's a little bit more reflective. So first, the humorous thing. So I kind of tweeted about this actually a little bit ago, so if you follow me on Twitter, you've already seen it, but I'm going to elaborate on it a touch. It's that when I was involved in the evangelical church, I don't think I allowed myself to find humor in the Bible. Everything seemed to be serious. I couldn't laugh at it. You couldn't kind of be like, what the hell are these writers doing? This is ridiculous shit. Because supposedly everything is breathed out from the mouth of God. Therefore, it is the word of God, literally the words of God. And you couldn't laugh at it because it would almost be seen as impugning the character of God. But when you get to the story of Jacob and Esau, and then Jacob and Leah and Rachel, and the many other women that Jacob impregnates, there's some funny shit going on. So here are the highlights. We already know that Jacob tricked Esau into giving him his birthright that was rightfully by birth belongs to the firstborn that was Esau's. So Esau's already given that over. So there's already one element of Jacob tricking somebody. And it's also important to remember that his name actually means he cheats, which is interesting and important to consider. So there's a self-reference, there's an acknowledgement by the scribes, by the authors here, that Jacob is a trickster. But now his trickery goes even further. What ends up happening is not only does Jacob acquire through deceitful means, through trickery, Esau's birthright, but now he actually gets his father's blessing that again was intended for Esau. Isaac tells Esau to go out and get a hunt, a kill, so that Esau can prepare a stew and feed Isaac, and then Isaac will bless him. But now Isaac's wife overhears this, and because she favors Jacob, she plots a little plan. Here's the details. Esau was a hairy motherfucker. Jacob was baby smooth. Rebecca says, I got an idea, Jacob. Why don't you go out, go into the field, get some of the sheep, I'll make a really delicious stew, and then why don't you line your skin with some fur and make yourself feel hairy so that your blind, old, aging father, when he tries to see who you are, will rub your skin and think that you're Esau, and then will give you the blessing. I mean, I think that's fucking ridiculous. Okay. As a side note, when I was younger, I have hairy legs. I mean, they're not ridiculously hairy, but you know, I'm not baby smooth. My father used to pretend that he was Isaac and would like rub my legs and be like, Esau. Totally traumatized me, I'm sure. Anyway, moving on, the plan works. Jacob goes in, brings the stew that his mother prepared, puts the fur on his body. Isaac is a little unsure because he's like, the voice sounds like Jacob, but yet your hands feel like my hairy son. Who are you? And then Jacob's like, I'm Esau. And then Isaac's like, cool. And then he gives him the blessing. Trickery complete. Esau gets pissed, says that he's going to kill Jacob. Rebecca, the mother, overhears this, sends Jacob on his way so that he can get a wife. But again, as before, like when Isaac was looking for a wife, he can't take a wife in Canaan. So actually Isaac says, you know, why don't you go off to the land of your father, land of your fathers, your forefathers, the land of Abraham, the family, the clans that Abraham belonged to, and go get your wife there. So he does. He goes and he meets with Laban. Laban has a couple of daughters. One is beautiful. Her name is Rachel. And then there's Leah, who's the older daughter. And then Laban actually pulls a little bit of a trickery as well to make it so that Jacob actually has to sleep with Leah, even though he wants Rachel, because Rachel's the hot one. Apparently Leah's a little blind or something like that. Her eyes are soft, the Bible says, so maybe that means she has kind of like that milky thing. We don't really know, but anyway, he wants the younger daughter, but that can't happen, so Laban kind of orchestrates it so that at night the older daughter goes in and Jacob actually bangs the older daughter, and then he gets pissed off and he's like, I thought that I had an agreement with you that you were going to give me Rachel, and then the father is kind of like, but you know, now this happened, so why don't you just stay and hang out with me and work with me for a few more years, and then I'll give you the younger daughter. Jacob agrees. I don't know. Weird cultural shit going on, but really interesting to think about. Again, kind of funny. People messing with each other, people screwing with each other, and I think this, again, is interesting because we can think about that trickster category that I referenced when we were talking about the story of Babel, with God coming down and confusing humanity and dispersing them and making it so that they can't communicate and plot with one another by confusing their languages, by spreading thousands and thousands of tongues across the earth. Okay, so now you get more trickery, but now instead of it necessarily just being directly from Yahweh, from God, into interfering into human affairs, now you get the representative of God's blessing as coming from Abraham through Isaac, now into Jacob. You get Jacob as the representative, the manifestation or the expression of God's providential hand moving over time and applying his grace to a particular people as being bestowed based on trickery, as sort of like saying that this is some good shit. These are your forefathers. This explains who your people are. This is how the means of grace have been applied, was through wacky means. And I don't think it's disrespectful to say it's wacky. It is kind of wacky. I think it's funny. I think it's silly. I think it's a little bit goofy. It's a trickster thing. That's kind of funny. Tricksters are a little bit humorous. They violate the ethical codes a little bit. They circumvent the social mores, and they get things done for purposes to accomplish their tasks or to realize God's goals or whatever. This is something that exists in all kinds of mythological cultures, all kinds of cultural traditions. The figure of the trickster is an archetype and is a key figure in the history of humanity in its narratival self-telling of itself. And it gets worse. Once Jacob and his wives start to try to procreate, one of the wives, Rachel, the prettier one, the younger one, she's barren and she's not able to conceive children. So she says, why don't you bang my servant and get her pregnant? So then Jacob does. She gets pregnant. And then Leah, the older wife, she gets jealous, and then she tries to trick Jacob so that she'll come in, or so that he'll come in and sleep with her and conceive more children. And it's like this competition between Leah and Rachel about who can bear more children from Jacob, and then they have servants going in and out of his tent, and this is all recounted in one chapter. And it's pretty funny because it just sounds like a rotating door, like this bang fest between Leah and Rachel and all the servants and whatever. And children are being conceived and they're being named, and the names have like special significance and meaning and stuff like that. But it's all really kind of funny, I think. And it's this silliness and this wackiness that I think is important for us to not disregard, to recognize that it is there. It infuses the human element into these stories. When you think of these things as being divine from a top-down sense, that they come down from heaven, that they descend into our laps, so to speak, things become a little too self-serious. And we lose actually some of the important elements, the human elements that are being conveyed through the telling of these stories and these myths that help the culture understand themselves. I mean, I can almost just imagine some of these children sitting around going, excuse me, but teacher, like, that's unethical. What Jacob did, I was stealing. He was deceitful to his twin brother. We shouldn't be deceitful, right? And then I think you get a lesson taught out of this, right? It opens up the door for further reflection. It isn't just something that is meant to be a simple one-to-one transmission of information, but it opens up, I think, a context. It opens up a field or a domain of meaning and discussion that can be further explored. And I think that's the purpose of so much of this type of teaching. It takes place within a very rabbinical tradition that is meant to provoke thought, that is meant to bring us into a cultural context so that we can start unpacking things and then situate ourselves within it and then continue in a real dialectical investigation. And it's that humor that I think I downplayed when I was reading the Bible previously, but I chuckled a little bit when I read the Tower of Babel and when God comes down and plays the role of the trickster, and I was laughing my ass off in the cafe when I was just reading this story about Jacob. When Jacob tricks Esau and then lines his body with animal fur, I'm like, okay, that's funny. And then this rotating door bang fest thing with Leah, Rachel, and the servants, I was like, this is ridiculous. This is clearly funny. So let's not neglect that stuff as we're reading. Let's pay attention to not only the potential spiritual and divine and personal and political and social and socioeconomic themes, but let's look at the style of the writing. Let's look at the format of how these messages are conveyed. And if they're wrapped in humor, then let it be. Okay, but then now the more serious thing that I do think is kind of an interesting spiritual element in this section that I read is the story of Jacob's ladder, as sometimes it's referred to, or it can be translated like a set of stairs. And basically, Jacob is before he goes and finds his wives, Leah and Rachel. He sits down to take a rest, and he ends up having a vision, and it's of this ladder or this set of stairs that is ascending up to heaven, and angels are climbing up and down. And then God, of course, is up at the top. And I think there's something really interesting about this. It creates this really lovely picture of the connection between the transcendent and the immanent. It is connected through this ladder. It is connected through this set of stairs. Depends on how you translate the Hebrew word. But I think what's really interesting about that is it shows what in Greek words is oftentimes referred to as methexis. And methexis means participation. And it's basically concerned with how do we understand the ontology of the world? How do we understand the being of the world? Is the world just purely material? Is it divine? Is it an idea? Etc., etc., etc. And this has been debated obviously by philosophers, theologians throughout the ages. But what you get here is, I think, a really lovely picture of a type of participatory ontology. That is, that there is a place, or that there are specific places in the world that theurgically usher us upwards into the throne room, but that simultaneously connect with a kind of downward approach. And that's why these angels, they're moving up and down between these two spaces, between the material, the immanent, and the transcendent, the immaterial, or the world of heaven, the kingdom of heaven. And that's why then Jacob names the place Bethel, which basically means house of God. And so there's something about these places that usher us upwards, and that simultaneously descend downwards and show us how it is that there's like a participatory connection between the material and the immaterial. And now maybe we can say that what Jacob is seeing and what the writers are trying to articulate to us is that there are particular places, regions, maybe environmental elements like, I don't know, waterfalls or beautiful mountains when you're hiking through Yosemite Park, or like if you're in the Highlands in the Isle of Skye or something like that, and you're like, okay, yeah, I guess heaven does exist on earth. I get it now. I get why people would sort of fantasize about how things might be even more perfect than this, because this is pretty damn freaking perfect. Could you imagine if the entire world was like this and trying to sense peace, or whatever it is that people get when they're in those kind of more romantic moments of their lives? And I think there's something similar going on here with Jacob's ladder. It's this idea that the throne room of heaven and the place of humanity are always interconnected, that there are ways of ushering up, and that there are connections by which heaven kind of meets us down here in the world. Take with that what you will. If you tend to be a little bit more poetic, romantically inclined, you might really like that. You might look at blades of grass, you might look at flowers, you might look at sunsets, and you might see something kind of behind that, or something through that, or in that, that kind of ushers you upwards. Or maybe you don't like that language and you tend to prefer to be a little bit more immanentist, a little bit more materialist, maybe a little bit more scientific, but you still want to be opened up to the mysteries and the excess that is beyond that. I don't really have a dog in the fight between like which one of those is better. I actually don't know that they're even mutually exclusive. I think you can kind of figure out how to work through them together, but nevertheless, I just think there's something interesting in understanding the ancient mind, and then to really kind of cultivate a mindset that would attune ourselves, if you will, to that excess, that beyond, that transcendence, however you want to work through it. But anyway, that's kind of what I was thinking as I was reading through this particular section. See you soon.